Hello and welcome everyone. My name's Greg and we've got Jen sitting here in the virtual fish tank today. Welcome, Jens.
Yeah, hello.
Hello. And
Thank you.
Yeah, we had a false start last week when we were trying to do this, and this is designed to be what we call Wirecast in the wild. Jens and I are both avid creators using Wirecast on a regular basis, and we wanted to share some of our experiences and our discussions, totally candid, totally unscripted. The only thing we want to do when we do this is pick a topic and we're going to talk about it and chat about it and so on. Now, before we do anything, just to have a quick chat about what we've already done this morning. So last week, we had some challenges and problems. Let's quickly talk about what they were. Our topic today is encoder settings demystified. Now, it's rather ironic that that was our topic for our first show because we had an encoder setting problem last week. So what happened last week? Just a quick explanation. I had record to disk locally set to 4 megabits per second in terms of the bandwidth, and I had streaming to YouTube at 1.25 megabits. But for some reason, we had a look at the statistics after the show, and the bandwidth, the throughput that was being used on the YouTube stream was the same as the disk recording. So a little unexpected problem there, but today we've got 1.25 for both and no problems today. So there's the first lesson on encoder settings. Use the same throughput on disk and streaming. It'll definitely give you a better result.
Yeah, but I think we discovered a bug and hopefully that get fixed very quickly because you want to record in higher quality than you stream to be prepared for the post-production.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. But it was an unexpected one. And to be fair, we've captured the data. We've sent a support info file off to Telestream, as well as a copy of last week's video, which they're the only people who are ever going to look at it again because it was pretty awful. Anyway, so we're here now.
That's it. If you run into unexpected issues, I mean, you don't know what happens, and it can ruin your show. And I mean, our last week was the best example of it. So
yeah,
be prepared for the unexpected, but that's hard. It's easy to say, but hard to be, really.
It is. And last week it was challenging. You know, we saw all of this stuff happening, and you know, we wanted to try and keep going and try and make it all work, but it, you know, as they say, shit happens. It's a, you know, common saying. But anyway, let's move on. So encoder settings. Now, before we do talk about that, let me quickly talk about the fact that we're using the new Wirecast beta today. So this new version of Wirecast has a lot of new features, one of which is the background that you are now looking at. So this is a motion loop background that's part of the new media library that comes with Wirecast. And as well as the video backgrounds, there's also in the media library a whole heap of music. The music that you heard at the beginning when we started today also came from that media library. So that's a really nice new addition to Wirecast as well. And I'm told that it's all royalty free as well. So anyway, encoder settings. Tell me what you use yourself. I'll start with you, Jens. What do you generally stream at yourself? Your settings, your setup.
A little bit more luxury in terms of bandwidth. So I try to stream at 4 megabit with H.264 encoder and 128 kilobits for audio. That's my usual setup. It really depends. If you're sure that you have a very good connection, I go up to 10 megabits for full HD, but you really have to be sure that you have at least 20 megabits up. So that's in general a good rule of thumb. If you speed test your connection, and let's say you get 6 megabits up, then just stream at the half of the value. So your stream setting would be 3 megabits per second.
So my bandwidth here is 5 megabits per second in terms of my actual raw internet upload speed. Pardon me. So yeah, I could technically try and get a little bit more out of the link, but because I use Rendezvous and bring in guests regularly to my stream, I deliberately pick that 1.25. It works well for me. Now, last week, even though things weren't working, we had one thing working a lot better, and that was the ability to show you stuff on screen other than our ugly faces. We were doing that through NDI screen sharing and all of that kind of stuff from my other computer. And one of the things that we found in this version of Wirecast that we're using today, and to be fair, it is a beta version, it doesn't have NDI working. It's totally not working. So, you know, literally about 1 minute before the broadcast, I was trying to get titles up on the screen, the pretty motion titles and all of that kind of thing from Title Live, and chat comments. I wanted to get that up as well, but that didn't work. And we have no way of getting any NDI sources on screen. So that's one bug that we'll make sure we report to the Wirecast team. But let's do this anyway. So you're going to have to work with us and pretend we've got Wirecast open in front of you. I'm going to open it on another computer because I don't want to change the settings on this one live as we go. And we're just going to talk about some of the settings in there and what's good and what works and so on. So let's do that now. So output settings. So first of all, just an unusual one. So when I'm streaming to YouTube, I do not turn on auto start for my event. This is something that a lot of people do use auto start, but I don't. Do you use it yourself if you've got a pre-scheduled event, Jens?
It really depends where I stream. Really, if YouTube is the only channel I stream to, I definitely don't do the auto start. If I stream into a platform like Restream or something like that, yeah, I just link my accounts and then I stream live through these restreaming accounts, and then you're more or less bound to the auto start. So that's really, if you just do a single target, do as much manual as you can, because this saves you if you hit problems. But if you use restreaming services, which I do a lot, then you just enter your YouTube credentials and they use the API to get the streams up and running through the different portals.
Yeah. So the reason for that, just as you were indicating, and what I might do, I can't get my remote desktop working, but I'm just going to quickly youtube.com/ I'm going to see if I can share my screen from here instead. And let me log in. So the reason, so if you can imagine, we've got a bit of time before the show starts, and the ability to have a look at what that looks like on screen, make sure your audio is getting through, make sure your video looks fine before you go live, that's something that certainly saves a lot of problems later. One other trick for young players, in the YouTube portal itself, there's a setting to automatically start broadcasting once it starts receiving encoded data. For the same reason, you don't want to use that either, because you do want to have a look at what it actually looks like before you go live. So let's go and see if I can get the live streaming.
And you always have a little bit latency. So once you see yourself in YouTube, then this is content from, I don't know, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, depends on your connection. So you're always behind. So if you hear something bad or crackling in the audio, it's already too late. So that's always good. Check it well in advance. Make sure you have good audio quality. The streaming platform receives your stream in good quality. So that's ensures you a very good experience. And then on the other hand, if you start with a trailer or sound intro, whatever, you don't know when to start. So if you just hit go live and then the session initializes and then starts streaming, the bandwidth goes up. So at what second do you start with your trailer? So this is another reason for connect before the show and then manually go live, and then you can synchronize this.
Yeah. So for people who don't use the live dashboard in YouTube, this is a place where you can start and stop streaming, and you can preview your stream before your show goes live. It's what I use each and every week when I do my regular broadcasts, and it works well for me. So let's move on. Back to inside the encoder settings. So within YouTube settings, and I'll just click that now on my other laptop, we've got the encoder settings. And as I said, let's just talk about the different types of encoders for a second. Apple H.264 is what I'm using at the moment. There's also X.264. There's NVIDIA encoding if you're on a Windows machine. What do you use first of all, Jens?
I use the NVIDIA encoding because I made sure at the time I picked the components for my streaming rig that I use NVIDIA graphics card because the graphics card gives you the best performance. So all the encoding, the graphics card is built for this. This is purpose-built rendering encoding engine. They have a lot of power on there. So if you offload the encoding onto the GPU, the CPU can relax and can do the Wirecast stuff, and so you level a little bit the resources of the computer, and that's what I definitely use.
Yeah, okay. Similar to me, I use Apple H.264 as I mentioned before. It's the hardware encoder on an Apple machine, so that's the difference between the two of us. Have you played with X.264 much?
Yes and no. It's hard to tell because X.264, that's a royalty-free version. And to be honest, the benefit on the one hand is the disadvantage on the other. So you get better picture quality at the same streaming bit rate, or if you turn it around, it's you can use less bandwidth for the same image quality. But this comes with more CPU load or GPU load. So the codec has to calculate more. And that's what I say. If you have tend to have a weak system, go to the H.264. If you have a strong system and you have to reduce bandwidth and the bandwidth side is your problem, then go for the X.264.
Yeah, good way of explaining it. So strong CPU and low bandwidth versus the other way around. That's how you can kind of tell. Speaking of CPU, I'm just having a look at my screen right now and seeing I've got about 1.25 megabits per second. For some reason, the CPU load, I had that turn yellow a couple of minutes ago. It went up to 70%, something that I don't normally see. when I'm streaming. That might be due to that capture that I set up a few moments ago. Who knows? But we'll watch that as we go. So I do use the Apple hardware encoder as well, Apple H.264. I have a reasonably decent spec machine. I've got an i7 processor, multi-core CPU. It was the biggest and best CPU I could get when I bought this particular machine. It's an Apple iMac Retina, but it's a couple of years old. So, if you are using the latest and greatest, biggest CPU you can get, then by all means use X264. So why do I use Apple? I did try using X264 and the CPU went through the roof and I was dropping frames and things were going bad left, right, and center. It just didn't work. But there are some challenges using, oh, by the way, I've got Lutz. Hello, Lutz, and welcome. Which build do you have of the Wirecast beta? I'm using, let's have a look. Wirecast about. Yep, I'm using the same version as yourself, Lutz, so it's the exact same build. And yeah, NDI source is just not coming in. I did open Sienna NDI monitor and I could see data coming in. I wanted to have titles from Title Alive from my MacBook on the left of me over here as the intro to this broadcast today, but it just wasn't working. But it was coming into NDI monitor, so something weird with Wirecast there. I did read something about that in the forums as well. I'll do a little bit more digging afterwards. Where was I? Apple H.264. What was I about to say? I can't remember. I got distracted. Thanks, Lutz.
Yeah, let me jump in. We were talking a little bit about CPU and what configuration. One reason I stick to Windows is you are more or less free in what CPU you use. I personally have very, very good experiences with Xeon processors. Mm-hmm. So I have a Xeon, the E5 2600.
I've got my daughter looking in over here on the side. Just a quick interruption. My former producer who used to do my show, and she's kind of teasing me in the background there, but anyway, that's what you get. That's what you get when you do live streaming from your home. Anyway, I just wanted to embarrass her. It's a worthy reason to interrupt.
Yeah. Yeah. What I wanted to say is CPU is mega important, GPU as well. So if you make these two components very good, you're on the safe side. And then third comes the hard drive. But yeah, that's...
Okay. So there is one little caveat and one gotcha that I found for using an Apple hardware encoder. So if you go from and you transition from a solid black to something with some motion, and I'll give you a really specific example. When I'm doing my normal stream, I have video content that I'm playing onto another monitor using VLC. And then I screen capture that and I bring that into Wirecast. And I found out that if you go from solid black to playing a video with VLC that's captured, all of a sudden your bandwidth goes to about 8 or even 9 megabits per second, even if you've only got it configured to 1.25 megabits per second using the hardware encoder. Now, for someone who doesn't live in the third world, when it comes to internet, that might be okay. But my internet bandwidth here just doesn't cope with that. And I get buffering and I get dropped frames and all of that kind of thing happening. So short answer is be very, very careful if you are using an Apple GPU, using the Apple hardware encoder, and you're transitioning from a solid color to motion, particularly like that example that I gave. Any other thoughts?
I think it's not only black. It's in a freeze frame in general. So if you freeze a frame or have a still image, So you come from motion, then you have a still image, and then you go to motion again. That is problematic for the encoders. I had it several times as well, that I thought the system is doing hard after the still to get the motion encoded again. But I haven't nailed it down, to be honest, but it seems very common. I see it on other YouTube stuff or on other videos. You see it. It's always a hard time if you start with motion, then you have very little motion or nothing, like a still image, and then go to motion again. If it's a longer, maybe you have on a break for 5 minutes or something like that with a still image, and then you come back after 5 minutes. That's always hard for the encoder. That's what my experience is. So better to not have a still image in the background if you're on a break. Just add a little bit movement, and this comes what you said in the beginning with the new media library that Wirecast added. You have lots of resources that you can have a kind of moving background, even if you on pause or on break or something like that.
Yeah. And one other trick to get around that, when you're doing a hard cut in Wirecast, I had the same problem just cutting from one shot with cameras to another shot. I actually noticed the same problem, not just going from still to motion, but just hard camera cuts. So as a result of that, I don't do hard camera cuts anymore. It looks pretty awful. I wish there was a way for me to cross dissolve like that, probably a little bit better. But is there a way for Wirecast, if you're on the same layer, it does this kind of from one place to another? I wish there was a way to turn that off. I'm sure there probably is, but I haven't found it. Cross dissolve, maybe, there we go. Let's try that just out of interest while we're here and solving. There we go. That's all I needed to do. I'll use that this weekend on Oz by Drone. So I'd been meaning to look for that, but I just hadn't got around to finding it. Anyway,
yeah, it's funny that different software or hardware do it differently. So if you're on a Blackmagic mixer or something like that, a vibe is a vibe and a dissolve is a dissolve at the end, but how they approach it is a little bit different. That's what I found. So
yeah.
So let's you have to find your way through it.
Yeah. So let's get back into encoder settings, right? So again, I wish I could show you my laptop here, but we've got this weirdness today. But so we've talked about the encoder, the width and the height. That's pretty obvious. Okay, we know what the width and the height do.
Yep.
Couple of obvious things. You want the width and height to match your canvas size. You look like you're about to say something. Yeah.
Yeah. Stop. I mean, width and height sounds easy, but if you're on restricted bandwidth like you, what would you do more? Would you prefer going full HD, stream at 1.2, or would you go 720 and stream at 1.2?
Well, I'm at 720 and I can't do full HD because you just need more bandwidth. You can't do full HD on 1.2. And in fact, when I originally started doing streaming, I was running 520, I think it was, the resolution or whatever it is. I can't remember the exact number, but the point is, it's an obvious thing. If you can't do high bandwidth, use lower resolution to have a lower bandwidth. Obvious statement.
Yeah, but maybe put it the other way, not in your case in particular. Say you have 5 megabits, and what is better? You use full HD with 5 megabits? I mean, that's obvious. Let's put it a little bit lower. Let's say 2 megabits. Would you rather do full HD at 2 megabits, or would you prefer to go 720 at 2 megabits?
Well, just using the cheating way of doing it, and if you have a look at the presets that are available, full HD is not available at 2 megabits per second based on the presets that are there. So that's the the cheats way of looking at it. And I do, you'd be stupid not to at least start with the presets that are available in Wirecast. It does help you. But to answer your question, no, I'm not. I'm not gonna do 2 megabits on full HD.
Yeah. The point is, it better do a lower resolution, but with a bandwidth that fits to the resolution, then go with a higher resolution, and the image get washed out because the encoder is not getting enough data through, or the bandwidth does not allow to get enough data through. Let's put it this way.
Speaking of which, it's an interesting topic, right? So encoder versus the data that actually gets sent up your internet pipe. So the Apple encoder that we talked about before, that was sometimes generating 9 megabits per second of data, that's only a brief transient issue. Now the question is, for whatever reason, Wirecast was pushing 9 megabits of data per second up that internet link, which is why I now do all of these smooth transitions instead of hard cuts. What would be a better idea, in my opinion, is for Wirecast to say, well, we're going significantly above the configured bandwidth. Let's keep some buffered locally instead of letting those packets get dropped in the network, which causes retransmissions, which causes buffering in YouTube and all of that kind of bad stuff. Thoughts?
The problem is, at one point you get, if you have failed packets and they get retransmitted, then all the retransmit eat your bandwidth, and you make the problem worse.
Absolutely. So you've just hit the nail on the head, right? So even outside of, RTMP, that sits on top of other underlying protocols, and those protocols have got their own retransmissions and windowing sizes. So if you kill that, it's going to have a big impact. So yeah, it'd be good if a future version of Wirecast realized it was trying to send too much data significantly above what it is that's configured and buffered it locally, rather than kill the network and kill the broadcast. Anyway, that's just my little bee in my bonnet. So frames per second. This is probably one of the most hotly debated things in broadcasting. What say you?
Yes.
What say you?
I try to look at the whole chain and make it fit. So it doesn't make sense if you have a 24 or 25 frame camera and you push 60 frames out. It just makes no sense. So what I recommend is keep everything the same, keep the resolution the same, keep the frame rate the same. So if your camera does 1080 at 25 frames, just ingest 1080 25 frames. And if you stream at 720, use 25 frames. The less you change, the less the encoder has to do. And this release stress from the CPU, the GPU, from the whole system.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking of changing down to 25, not because my camera does that, but my camera is doing 50 frames per second, and since it's a multiple of 25, it seems logical for me to do that. And also from a second perspective, if I've got less frames per second going out, that's less data, less bandwidth, and in this wonderful third world internet country that I live in, that's not going to be a bad thing to send less data.
Yeah, that's one of my last live shows I streamed. I had exactly the same problem. I started with 50 frames, and then I hit a weak point in the connection, and the whole system was doing hard to regain all the data and pushing it through after the connection came back in full speed. So if you push the systems hard, it's even harder to get back to where it was if you have a little bandwidth bottleneck or a congestion here or there, or you open a YouTube video and stuff like that, the CPU goes through the roof. So the higher you stress the system before, the worse it is for the system to
catch up.
regain, regain your original setting. So I would recommend start as low as you can. Not saying use 1 or 2 frames per second, and I wouldn't go much below 25, to be honest. But think about 50 or 60 frames. Does it really make sense? Maybe more for recording or post-production, if you have a really post-production involved. But if you just stream live, make your life easy, just use 25 or 30 frames, and then off you go.
Okay. And speaking of frames, so keyframe every certain number of frames. The rule of thumb is generally make that double the amount of frames per second. So if you're 30 frames per second, you normally make your keyframe 60, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, with keyframes, you can play a little bit. I would say that it gives you a bit room. It really depends. The codecs are optimized for, they use an iframe, and based on the iframe, you have P and B frames. So P are predictive and B are bidirectional frames. The more PB frames you put in there, the more optimized the bandwidth and the savings you get. But if you play this game too far, then you lose image quality, and you need rather an iframe a little bit earlier. This is a place where you really can play and see what works best for you. I sometimes do 120 even, and having very good results. It really depends what system you use, what target you have, and what player, and so on and so on. The whole chain. But test this before, compare it, and find the best setting for you. As you said, the rule of thumb is double it, but you can even go higher if you want to optimize for data
your
or
bandwidth
something
and your
like
data,
yeah.
And the other thing that I would suggest is make sure you check with your streaming provider, because if their system doesn't support those non-standard values, that'll cause you problems as well. General rule of thumb: use the presets that are built into Wirecast, if possible. Going on to the profile, baseline, main, and high. What's all that about?
Don't use base, go with main, and don't use high. Currently, that's what's valid for the current situation, to be honest.
Yeah.
Base is, I guess, if you need support for iPhone 4 or something like that. So some very old phones, whatever, it's maybe 0.5%, or I mean, usually people update their devices relatively quickly. So don't use base. As long as you, I mean, if you have customers that, hey, we are on iPad 2s and iPhone 4s and we are 100,000 people, then go base, no question. But nowadays, I would say go main. That hits the most devices. If you go high, you have the potential to lose some viewers in terms of the codec.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. I mean, Do you agree, or?
Yeah, look, you don't need to use base. I did do some reading on it ages ago, and there was a lot more detail in terms of what those different profiles have and support as part of the underlying technology. But for an average social media streamer or even semi-professional broadcast streamer, you don't need to change that from the default of main for 99% of situations. So there's the quick high-level summary.
Yeah.
When I'm keyframe alignment, tell me what's that?
Pardon?
Keyframe aligned.
Keyframe aligned gets in use when you use multiple streams. So what you want to do if you have a adaptive bitrate player and you send different resolutions, you want to have all the keyframes aligned so that the player is able to switch bandwidth on the fly. So if you're on the mobile phone and you have low reception, it goes down to maybe 240p. And if it's not keyframe aligned, you would see jumps in the video. And that's why the keyframe aligned is so useful if you do multi-bitrate streaming.
Yeah. And that's pretty much all of the video settings that are available in the Apple H.264 settings. As we mentioned before, there are other different types of encoders which have different settings. So if I move to X264, for example, they've got a quality setting where you can go anywhere from very slow encoding to ultra-fast encoding, and there are obviously trade-offs in terms of the quality of the video that comes out there. Thoughts, comments?
It's the physics, you can't stream at 200 kilobits per second and think you can get 4K. Each pixel has its data, and this is just pure physics. So you hit limits, and you have to find your best setting, your trade-off, what you can live with. So if you're low motion talking heads like we do this session now, we could maybe go up with the keyframes and use very low encoding profile, and still the output would be okay. If you do high motion like sports, then you want to see the tennis ball or the football or the race car or whatever, and you don't want to see a washed out line. I think that could have been a race car or something like that. So then you have to change your settings. So talking head content, I go with different settings as if I do football, soccer, golf, or whatever. If you know your content, you can prepare a little bit, and you can adapt the encode settings to optimize for bandwidth usually.
And the last main one in there is strict constant bitrate, which is not available when I was using the Apple hardware encoder. So what would be the circumstance that you think is a good reason to use that turned on?
Strict, I have a problem. I have a little bit of problem with the term strict constant bitrate. Constant bitrate is a little better than variable bitrate, VBR. It moves in smaller areas. Even constant bitrate isn't constant. The video content changes each and every frame, and how could you encode with the same bitrate? It's just not possible. Constant bitrate just means that you not go through the roof So if you target at maybe 2 megabits constant bitrate, you will see. I just assume, I haven't measured really, but with constant bitrate, you get peaks maybe up to 2.5, and in the other direction, maybe 1.5. With variable bitrate, you go, if your target is 2, you can go up to 4 megabits, and even as low as maybe 200K, whatever.
So to put this a different way, if you're someone who's doing internet-based streaming, you'd definitely use variable bitrate. But if you're doing something over a WAN or a dedicated network where you want to, you've got more bandwidth available to you, and it's a low latency network, then you can say, hey, yeah, I'm going to have dedicated to me a certain amount of bandwidth. And the encoder's then aware of that. And rather than trying to compress as aggressively, it can take use of that additional bandwidth that's available. That's the kind of circumstance that I think you'd use something like that.
Yeah, it's absolutely, you hit it. Why should I encode a still image at 2 megabits if I could do the same result, same result, with 1 megabit or even half a megabit? So if you want to save bandwidth or don't do stupid stuff, go variable bitrate. But if you on a LAN or something and you do from your encoder to a TV or whatever, and it's just that network you set up for this purpose, then I would go as high as possible with constant bitrate to get each and every pixel in the best possible quality.
Yeah, I've got one more thing. Main concept H.264. It's not one that appears in any of the default encoder settings on my Mac version of Wirecast. Do you have main concept appearing in yours? In the Windows version?
No.
No? So if you actually go and edit, and I know I'll challenge you to go to your Wirecast console in a moment and see if you can edit any existing profile and just go to the encoder and see if you can change it there. Because like I said, it doesn't appear in any of the default settings, but you can manually change it to that. And just go and do that now if I could challenge you, Jens, just for a couple of moments.
Yeah, no worries. I have to step out of the image.
I'll make you disappear. Hang on. Here we go. We've made... Yeah. There we go. So your camera's gone.
Okay. Good.
So while he's having a look at that, the other piece of the jigsaw is audio. Now, generally speaking, the audio settings don't have a significant impact on bandwidth. So again, if you're living in a third world country where your internet is not optimal, I'll say, you don't need to worry about that so much. It's not going to have too much of an impact. One other thing that I might just do very quickly, I'm going to edit my screen capture and see if I can show you some of the new features in the Wirecast beta that I'm running at the moment. Let's do that.
Okay, so I'm back.
Okay.
Okay, so you want to change the profile encoding. I do a manual.
Mm-hmm.
That was, sorry. It defaulted to Windows Media 9 multi-bitrate. That's maybe not the best recording format. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just curious if it was in the Windows version as well. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Okay.
But anyway,
encoder, there we go. I have a little bit different. I have I can confirm I have the main concept H.264, the X.264, and the Intel QuickSync H.264. That's the 3 encoder options I have.
Okay. So the main concept, H.264, and I don't have any document that tells me all of this stuff, so my understanding is it's another CPU-based encoder similar to X264, and you would only use that again if you've got a higher powered CPU. That's the circumstance you'd use that. There are a lot of differences reportedly between X264 and H264. The differences in detail, I don't know, so I won't pretend to talk about something that I'm unfamiliar with. But if you are using Wirecast, by all means, dig and have a play with that one. It's sitting under the hood over there.
Yeah, the main concept H.264 is a little bit more, or it has less options, so more for maybe hobbyists or whatever. You don't have to worry about too much settings. The Intel QuickSync H.264 gives you some quality and profile options. So it's a little bit, I mean, that's always the problem. If you check the H.264 specs, there's a ton of settings possible. And that's the beauty of the encode profiles. Wirecast has done all the bits and pieces for us and just exposes the settings that makes the most sense. So all the other settings are under the hood, and this is for good reason. So you don't want to read 20 books to understand H.264 to make your settings. So you just want to, resolution, bandwidth, just the key elements. And that's everything else is under the hood. And then
okay. So last little bit for today, just because we've got the new version of Wirecast that's come out, I'm going to bring up my Wirecast console and open that hole in time and space, the never-ending portal there. Open Rendezvous dashboard. So I wanted to share briefly, this Rendezvous dashboard is a major improvement in what's been in previous versions of Wirecast. Now, I'll give you a early warning. When I did what I'm about to do before, it did cause Wirecast to crash, but I won't do it exactly the same. So there is a little bug in there, but let's have a look. So the existing setting to select what video it is you're going to send to your Rendezvous, that's pretty basic. I can send a camera or I can send live output. This one is new, so as well as being able to send individual audio, you've got the ability now to send multiple devices to your Rendezvous clients. I can turn on multiple things at the same time. But even better than that, down the bottom over here, we've got an advanced dashboard where we can individually control and select audio levels, and then we could include left and right settings and so forth, and decide what we're going to send to the remote guest. The one thing that's missing, and I discovered this this morning, when I play out a video that's in a shot button in Wirecast, it doesn't let you currently mix that audio and send that audio to your remote guest. So for me, when I'm doing my existing show at the moment, I'm capturing data, my audio data, using Dante Via. So I could send Dante Via audio to you, but if I play, say down here, I've got an audio shot down here. If I sent that live right now, you wouldn't be able to hear that one. Now, there's one other thing in the Rendezvous dashboard that is new, and this is a really simple but really useful and helpful option. Where do I send my audio for you when you're in the Rendezvous dashboard? Right, so at the moment, I'm listening to you through the live output, and I've got monitoring turned on for each of my shots. But before we go live, if I want to listen to you before you go to air, before we get you into a live shot. This is where the rendezvous dashboard output will go to. Previously, in earlier versions of Wirecast, that was only going to whatever was the default audio output when you turned Wirecast on. And if you got it wrong and you got halfway through a broadcast and a guest joined, then all of a sudden you've got the guest audio being sent to local studio monitors, you get feedback loops and all sorts of other nasty problems. So being able to change that now is absolutely awesome. The only thing that's missing, I think, now is a disable. So if you want to still have the rendezvous dashboard open, but not have the audio going anywhere, we need a disable option. But certainly that's a big enhancement over what was available in earlier versions of the rendezvous dashboard. Just before I move off that, I'm just going to go back here for a minute. This option here, live output from Wirecast in the wild. Theoretically, this is a copy of the live mix that's going to air. But as I said before, when I tested this, I wasn't picking up the audio in that shot there. Theoretically, my way of understanding that is that should get all audio that I'm sending to air. But anyway, what do you think of the new look of the rendezvous stuff? Have you played with rendezvous much?
Here and there. I mainly do or don't do remote guests. I just have
I clicked that shot before and I just sent some audio and cut you off. Continue.
No worries. Yeah, I just said I usually don't remote guests in. So I do more the 4-5 camera shows, and there you have a lot of content and you don't need that much remote stuff. So I use it for sessions like this, or for debugging, or if you I have friends in the US and we do remote sessions and stream as well. So there it is very handy. There it's very useful. I have to admit I haven't played much with the beta currently. I hope, I haven't seen it, I will test. I hope they have improved even the, once you send the link over and I'm on maybe a mobile device, I couldn't enter names before and stuff like this. Hopefully they have improved it as well. And so that even on small displays, or if you
when you say you
browser,
when you say you couldn't enter names, what do you mean?
You have always flipped from horizontal to landscape, so you have to flip to portrait to enter your name, and then flip back to landscape to press the OK button, because the screen wasn't wide enough on a mobile device before.
Okay.
Yeah, I have reported it to Wirecast already, and as I said, I haven't played with version 12 now, because time was very short in the last days, and I will give it a try. Hopefully they have improved, and I was happy to see the rendezvous general improvements. So they are listening, and they will improve it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring my screen back up again for a minute, and one of my bugbears is the audio mixer. So at the moment, Jens, can you just talk so we can see where you are?
Yeah, I can give you a little
hint.
We go. Audio-wise.
There we go. So we can see. Yep. So we can see Jens's audio is on that third fader there. Now, the challenge that I've got with what's here at the moment, let's say I'll change this shot. And I'll turn Jens off that, even though I've got this in front at the moment, and then I'll bring the audio mixer back. All of a sudden, Jens was on the third fader, but he's moved on to the second fader. And
Yes, that's my audio level now. So
yes.
You have a visual check.
Oops, let me put it back. Keep talking. Hang on.
Yeah, I keep talking.
There we go.
Here you see my meters, and yeah, it's different.
Yeah. So the reason that this happens, right? So I have all of my audio down here in this shot. This is my audio shot. When I configure these kind of shots, I deliberately turn off any audio here. Why? Because just because Jens is not on the screen doesn't mean I don't want to hear his voice. I don't want to mute him every time I go full screen with myself or with something else. So that's the reason why I do that. But that causes problems because we see multiple copies of you. One is the camera version, this one over here, and this one over here is the other one. Maybe if they put all of the channels that have audio muted on the far right and they had only the other ones on the left, that would probably stop them moving around a little bit and help a lot, but we'll just have to wait and see.
I would prefer don't have a fixed channel setup. So if you have one audio, you see 1 meter. If you have 2 audio, you see the 2 faders. I mean, think back to a off-screen stuff. You want to level microphones, you want to level audio files, something like that. You can't because they're not live.
I'm just going to interrupt you. I'm just going to interrupt you for a second. Sorry about that. So I want to share with you something that happened just now. And I'm going to get the statistics up. So this is talking about what I mentioned before. Output, show statistics. So right now we're having our stream and Wirecast decided to send 4.5 megabits per second of traffic when I did a screen transition before, which of course sent my RTMP queue size up through the roof up to 5 seconds. Now, thankfully, it recovered, but our YouTube users would have seen buffering during that period of time. This is, I believe, like I said before, to do with this Apple hardware encoder problem. It doesn't happen on X264, but the problem is if I use X264, it's too much CPU load even on this machine, which is, like I said, I spec'd it out as high as I could when I purchased it. So there's our little final encoder setting thing for the day. Oh, did I have that on the screen? I didn't send that shot live. I am stupid. Let's try that again. My bad. Output. Show statistics. So there we go.
There we are.
So these peaks, 4.5, I'll just click on the bit rate, 4.5 megabits per second. And over here, the RTMP queue size went up to 5 seconds when that happened. And that was during a shot transition where I can't remember which one it was, but I transitioned a shot and that's where it happened. Anyway, look, that's enough for today. We've been rambling on for over an hour, but it's been fun. And I'm just having a look at one more bug. I don't know if this is actually a bug or a reality scenario. I can see that it's showing me we've got 0 viewers currently watching the stream. Now, this was a bug in an earlier version of Wirecast where if you streamed for longer than 20 minutes, the counter wasn't accurate. I'm curious just to have a look. Encoder settings, demystified. Let me go and click on it right now. I'm curious. Any other last tips for you that you want to share about encoder settings while I have a look?
Not especially encoder settings. One thing that I mention in the forum constantly is have a look at the PCI lanes. It's hard to understand, but it isn't actually that hard. Most IX processors just have 16 lanes. The latest ones, they're if you the ultra powerful whatever. I don't have the specs. Sorry. They start adding more lanes to the I family. But one reason I selected the Xeon family, so server processors, is that they have 40 PCI Express lanes. Because my system, I use a 16-lane graphics card. I use a 4-lane MV2 and VME storage. And so on and so on. A capture card with 4 lanes, and all these lanes add up. And in Wirecast, I think everybody is familiar with the USB bandwidth stuff. Same happens to the PCI bus. So if you just have 16 lanes and you have a 16-lane GPU, your PCI lanes are exhausted. If you have a capture card, they share. Then the system starts to share resources.
Pardon me, I was looking for my mute button so I didn't deafen anyone. Sorry about that. So I'm looking at the chat over here. We've got Lutz still in the room here. Hi, Lutz. He's asking Jens, where do you come from?
I'm from Germany.
Okay. Lutz, where are you from? And he also says, I agree, don't use base. I always use main. So definitely an agreement there. Earlier on today, we had Ruland joining us. Okay. Any other questions before we go? Please ask them now or forever hold your peace. All things being equal, we would intend to be back sometime next week, hopefully the same time. This is 7 a.m. for me, so apologies if I look a little bit unrested because I'm still getting the toothpicks out to try and wake up when I do this. But I picked this time slot because it works for the US, it works for Jens. It kind of works for me. We'll see. Anyway, that's all. See you next time. Thanks for joining, Jens, and have a good one.
Thank you, Greg. And yeah, nice evening, whatever, day, lunch.
Indeed. See you guys. Bye-bye, everyone.